So this YouTuber Force Gaming got to interview the Dune MMO developers. Let's check it out.
Hey everyone, welcome back. So recently I got the chance to sit down and have a chat with Dune Awakening's creative director, Joel Bylos. We spoke in some detail about their upcoming survival sandbox MMO, and I did my best to ask questions about some of the things that I've been most curious about for the game, including the general gameplay loop, like how those starting hours look and where you go from there, what types of PvE activities and points of interest we can expect to see, how PvP is going to work, both.
Oh man. Just seeing the visuals. I'm such a big fan of the Dune universe. I read the first Dune book back in like 7th grade, and it's the book that got me into reading more. Like, I really didn't read that much in school or in my free time before that. And when I had to read that book for like a book report, it made me realize, like, holy crap, there can be good books out there.
The small and large scale, what dungeons look like, the crafting and base building, and a few other things. It was about a 45-minute chat in total, and I'm going to condense that down, cutting all of the filler and the fluff. So here is what new things I've learned about Dune Awakening. My first question was, what are the opening hours like for players? Like, what sort of stuff can we expect to see and do in those first, say, 3 to 5 hours?
And is the leveling experience in the first few levels going to be abhorrent or not? Because that's kind of the determining factor for your whole game. If the first few levels, the first few hours are boring, we should not have to play 30 hours or 100 hours to finally see the game get good, in my opinion.
He told me that after character creation, there's a sequence where your ship gets shot down, you crash on the planet, and wake up inside of a cave. And then, quote, it's like a single player, maybe 10-minute tutorial section where we teach you the basics. You'll do a little crafting, you'll learn how to hydrate because that's important in Dune. You'll chat with a character and learn about the dialogue system, and then a bit of combat and a little bit of harvesting, and that
doesn't sound that bad, honestly. 10 minutes to kind of get you acquainted with the game and teach you the important systems. And by the way, I'm really glad to hear that the hydration system is important, because that's obviously huge in the Dune universe. I mean, you're on a desert planet. It should be. So that's good to hear. I haven't looked into this game that much, so just forgive me. I'm kind of catching myself up as we watch this interview video. And yeah, so it's really good to hear that.
That is essentially it. After that, he said you leave the instance tutorial area flying into a sandstorm, which results in you crashing once again, but now you find yourself in the Haga Basin, which is the first major open world multiplayer portion of the game. So I asked if there's a particular area that players will arrive when first entering Haga Basin. He said, you can think about it a bit like Conan Exiles. There's multiple start points in the bottom of the map. There's, I think, 40 different places that you can spawn, and then you funnel and move upwards through the map from there. He then
is this going to be some situation where people can learn the spawn points and spawn camp if it's like PvP? Or is it mostly PvE with designated PvP areas? It's an important point to know. I'm not super familiar with the MMO at this point, so I'm learning as we go here.
Expanded upon what players will be doing in those first few hours. You'll be learning about water, learning about harvesting, and then building. You build your first rudimentary base, and then because of the worm, you can't really move out from that starting region too quickly. There's too much of a distance. If you try to run across the sand, you'll get eaten by the sandworm. So your first kind of major task is to build a vehicle. At which point
this all sounds pretty good so far. I mean, yeah, it's a good intro experience as it sounds so far, and it fits the Dune universe, things that they're talking about. So this sounds promising.
Said that you'll be exploring this starting section of Haga Basin, searching through dungeons, ruins, and crashed shipwrecks, looking for the resources and schematics needed for you.
You know, I've seen just brief clips, just very brief clips of this game from other YouTubers and stuff. And yeah, I mean, the visuals are very striking, very appealing visuals. And the crafting there looked pretty cool. Yeah, everything is very visually appealing. Definitely gives me a positive vibe for sure.
To build your first bike, which basically makes this section a bit of like soft progression locking, where you have to complete this task before you have the tools needed in order to move forward and progress into the next area. Although he did clarify that this is only really going to be the case right at release, or if you play entirely solo, because later on anyone can technically come and pick you up in their vehicle that you can use to cross the sands without having to first build your own bike. So for people,
that's cool. Yeah, that's definitely cool. So like you said, a soft progression lock, and then it kind of opens up a bit, and you can have your high-level players pick you up. Your high-level friends, they can come pick you up in their rig, and they can kind of I guess, rush level you, who knows? I'm not sure.
People jumping into the game, say a few days post-release. If you have friends that are playing, they can literally just come and pick you right up straight away after you finish the tutorial section. You can go across the sands and then move into the rest of Haga Basin. So my next question...
Okay, so that kind of answers my question then. Yeah, it sounds like that is what can happen. You can get kind of power leveled by your friends, so that's cool.
Question was about how much time we can expect to be spending in this Haga Basin region. Because as we know, Dune Awakening is going to be divvied up into these multiple sections, which as of now, we know there is Haga Basin, and then the Deep Desert, and then the shared social hub towns. And with this question, I was really mainly curious about how much content we can expect in this region. So he said, based on...
When he says shared social hub towns, does that mean that everyone's experience who's playing this game, every player, they're kind of instanced and it's very small interactions, like 8 to 16 players, kind of like a Destiny vibe or something? Is it going to be like that? I really am sick of that. I really want more traditional player counts and player sizes for MMOs. I don't know. It's not my thing, these kind of MMO light experiences. I'm hoping that's not what he's saying here. Again, I just have to keep repeating myself here. I'm not super familiar with this MMO to this point, so I'm kind of learning as I go here.
On what they've seen through their playtest thus far, it's roughly about 50 to 60 hours worth of content before most players leave. It's as big as Conan Exiles, he said. Haga Basin is as big as Conan Exiles. The thing that you need in order to leave is to craft your first flying vehicle.
So he's saying just the basin is as big as the whole game of Conan Exiles? Okay, so just with a couple quick Google searches, it looks like the Skyrim map size is supposedly like 39 kilometers squared. And the Conan Exiles map size was supposedly like 53 kilometers squared, assuming the information I got is correct. So if just the basin area is 53 kilometers squared, this game is going to be pretty big. It's going to be pretty massive, or at least the map anyway.
Vehicle, the Ornithopter, that's really what you need to get out of Haga Basin, and getting that is a journey in itself. There are multiple...
I can't believe it. We get ornithopters. This is so cool, man. This is my Dune sci-fi dream come true. I just really hope the gameplay is good. I mean, it's obviously going to be awesome having experiences like this. Just flying in the Ornithopter is super cool. I really hope we can ride on the worms. So stuff like that would just be awesome. Getting the Chris knife, things like that. Super cool. I just really hope the gameplay is good.
Regions and biomes in the Haga Basin. It is quite a big area. It is as big as our other game. And just to clarify here, in the prior answer and with this one, he is talking about two different things. Your first soft progression gate is the crafting of a bike to leave the southern region of Haga Basin, which is basically the starting zone outside of the tutorial. And then beyond that, there is much more Haga Basin, all of these different biomes, places to see, and in those areas is where you're going to be spending that some 50 to 60 hours of game time leveling, crafting, building, and just progressing your way towards the construction of your flying ornithopter. And
I see no problem with that soft progression kind of lock with making the bike. That doesn't seem like a big deal. I'm just getting lost looking at these visuals here. I know it's all just kind of pre-rendered videos that we're going through, just kind of like trailer cutscene type things, but it just looks so cool.
And then with that, you can leave, finally, the Haga Basin region and move into what is essentially the end game in Dune Awakening, which is the Deep Desert. He also made a note here that once you get to this point where you've crafted your Ornithopter, it is just like a straight-up flying mount that you would expect to see in any MMO. Once you have it, you can fly over much of the environment, pretty much everything, and that really changes how you approach the world. In fact,
that sounds cool. No, that definitely sounds cool. And yeah, it sounds like it's probably going to change gameplay a lot since survival seems to be a big element of this game, right? So if you can just fly over everything in your Ornithopter, you kind of don't have to care as much about the survival elements anymore, I would think.
In fact, talking about this, he said, I always knew that scales of traversal would be a thing. So you start off on foot where it feels much more intimate, then you move to the bike, suddenly things become faster, more accessible, but then when you get the flying mount, everything changes. Harvesting becomes a matter of just flying to the right spots and picking things up.
And maybe that's okay. I think that's probably okay. That sounds like an okay experience, right? Because starting out, you want to have things a little bit more difficult. You want to get accustomed to the game. And if it's very survival oriented, you want to have those survival elements kind of weighing heavily on you. And as you open things up, as you progress in the game, you don't want to have to struggle as much to get those, basics, those materials or elements or whatever that you need to progress in the game. It makes sense that things open up a little bit and the basics become easier, I think. Because I think it would be too grindy and annoying to have to walk everywhere, just like in the very beginning of the game. If you have these elements in this universe as well, that makes sense to be there. I think it fits this way.
Every time you get one of these vehicle upgrades, it changes your perception of the world. Suddenly, things open up. And I think his point in this comment was that they're looking to sort of draw out that experience a little bit. So you're not jumping into having a flying mount immediately and as such skipping over much of the content and the world traverse.
Yeah, and I think that's good. Again, I think it's good to have that kind of sequence of events. You kind of scale up in your ability and your ease of collecting and gathering and things like that. I think that's fine. And having the survival elements kind of like, they kind of dim down and kind of fade away. They're still there. You still have to be aware of them, but it's much easier to manage.
And exploration. They don't want that to happen too soon in the experience. You will have to go through these many hours of progression as you move your way through Haga Basin before you can eventually make that ornithopter and use that flying mount.
Right.
Now, after that, I asked him what sort of points of interest we can expect to see. This was a big curiosity of mine. Like, what types of PvE and PvE areas and activities are we going to see? What is there going to be to do beyond walking through the desert collecting resources?
Yes, please let there be more than that. Please let there be more than that. I mean, yes, of course, just being put into the Dune universe is cool already. Just from a nostalgia and a sci-fi love standpoint, it's going to be awesome, regardless. But for how long, right? Is it going to die off, the awesomeness and excitement, after the first 10 hours, 20 hours, You barely get out into the deep desert and you're like, well, I'm, repeating things quite often here. It's kind of a dead loop and I'm not enjoying this game much anymore, Hopefully that's not what happens.
He said we have these things called shipwrecks. They are these small, self-contained PvP spaces, salvage areas that are considered free-for-all where any player can attack each other. He said that as you approach...
Okay, and that kind of answers my question, right? So you got these shipwrecks, these salvage areas, and those are the PvP zones. Okay, so it's not just open PvP map-wide. So I guess that's good, or at least good to know.
A wreck, you will pass a threshold and then get a pop-up message that says this is a War of Assassins PvP area. Now, why are you going to those shipwrecks? Well, because they're going to have some valuable resources that you want. But beyond that, he also said, we have natural world structures. We have this giant hammer of a rock called Mizrabar. It's a sacred place to the Fremen. Underneath that are different NPC outposts, different factions in the game world that have different outposts in these different areas. There's a giant chasm in the world called the Haga Rift. As you go down into it, it gets deeper and darker, and at this point, all of a sudden, you have to think about the lighting systems down there as opposed to up top. There's an area of the world where things have crashed and created a giant radiation zone, so you're going to need to be properly prepared survival-wise with the right gear to go into that area. So yeah, there's a lot of different biomes and spaces in the world. Now,
that all sounds good. I mean, yeah, it all sounds good. The crevice thing, that sounded sick. You have to take care with your lighting, be aware of the lighting and everything. That's going to be interesting. And the radiation zones, that sounds cool, Everything so far sounds good. Of course, we're on the very, very surface level. Things can go south very fast. So let's hope it doesn't do that. But as we see it, as we hear it, things are good so far.
At that point, I asked him for a bit more detail about these enemy camps. I was curious, is it what I expect? Are these just going to be like different compounds and installments that are full of enemies? We go in, we clear them, and we collect loot. To which he said, yes. As an example, he said that you're going to need fuel to power your shields and your bases. So you need to go run these outposts to get the fuel to keep your bases and vehicles up and running. The enemy camps actually serve the different factions, so they will each have their own unique individual look. He did say that you're going to go to the different camps to get resources that are unique to them, along with collecting the cosmetic unlocks of each of the factions. But that...
So something I'm wondering about is the survival element, is all of the resource gathering and everything, is it going to become monotonous and annoying? I mean, I know that's a huge element of survival games, but in some survival games, you can automate a lot of these things, right? You can automate a lot of this stuff. So I'm wondering in my mind if they're going to create good ways to automate these things, or are you going to manually have to go and gather resources through your whole life of playing this MMO? I'm not sure. That hasn't been made clear yet from this video. Of course, this is just Force Gaming going over his interview with the MMO director or, CEO or whatever. So, of course, he's not going to have every single detail right here, but I do wonder about that. Is the resource gathering going to become a grind, a monotonous grind that is not fun? Or is there a way to kind of automate it and so that you can focus on the other endgame stuff? You want to go to these essentially dungeons or like PvP zones to get cool gear and cool resources, to be able to focus on the endgame stuff.
That's not all. There's also progression unlocks that are found here. You're also going to get these things called intel points, which are what you spend in the tech tree to learn new schematics. You get these
Wait.
as you level up, which are what you spend.
Look at this. Look at this UI. Honestly, that's pretty clean. Like, I actually like this. I have no problems with this UI at all. It looks pretty clean. I like the symbolism here. You can kind of clearly see what these things are about. Yeah, it's pretty nice.
And in the tech tree to learn new schematics. You get these as you level up, but you can also get more of them by clearing these enemy camps. Now, I asked him about biome variety, surprisingly enough, right? Like, yes, this is Dune, so there's mostly going to be sand everywhere.
Right, yeah. I kind of laughed in my head as he said that, like, biome variety. Wait a second. This is a desert game, but, there are some different things to see. Or this is I believe this is not actually in the timeline of Paul Atreides. I'm pretty sure. I think I know that much from what I've seen before watching this video. And so, assuming that, there could be some differences. There could be some oases or whatever. Oases in the desert, so there could be some different biomes.
But I did get the sense in some of their early previews that they were using locations such as the Echo Labs to add a bit of visual variety to the world, and he pretty much concurred that that was the case. He said,
okay, yeah, no, seeing just those few visuals, yeah, you definitely get the feel of very different areas, different places, different biomes, if you will. So yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, the Echo Labs have this lush feeling in some of them. They're actually quite different. Some of them are like mining ecology labs, where you go down and they're using mining equipment to dig deeper down into the earth, and it's a different feel to the ones that are like this was a botany lab. But that's not all. He did say as well that in the world itself, they have areas where we have a backstory, like this area was built on top of an ecology lab, and the water systems from the Echo Lab have been running here for 10,000 years. They're sort of leaking a bit into the environment, so this part of the planet is actually slightly greener than you might.
I really do worry. I worry about the survival and like resource gathering elements, because I personally am not like a big survival game fan, so I may not be the target audience for this MMO. I'm just really hoping that I can be. Like, I'm hoping that in some way these survival elements, these gathering resources elements can be made more fun or more engaging or rewarding somehow, I hope that there's a spin on the survival element in this MMO that will make it more enjoyable for me, because I want to be in the Dune universe. I want to be in this MMO. I know I do. But I worry that I'm going to drop off in terms of interest with the survival and gathering elements. I do.
I'd expect. Now, I'm actually happy to hear that they're taking a few liberties here. It's not going to be 100% sand, 100% of the places. They're going to mix it up a bit, although he did.
Yeah, I'm happy for that too. I can admit that even though the Dune universe is cool and I love the book and the newer movies are great, but man, it would definitely get old just seeing sand only. I agree with that.
At the end, point out by saying, like, yes, at the end of the day, if you hate deserts, then I don't think this game is going to be for you, which of course it makes sense. It is Dune. It is going to be mostly desert.
Right.
Honestly, it kind of feels like no matter what they did here in terms of adding biome variety or not adding it, they would be dealing with some complaints, right? Although he did add that in the Dune universe itself, it does allow for some of this already. He said, there are things on the planet that we'll do in the future, in future updates, like they have the polar caps. There are ice caps in Dune. It is mentioned in the books. It's part of the lore. They have a tundra area.
That could definitely be cool, and that would definitely be a very, very big contrast from these sandy areas, right? It could make gameplay very different too, and the survival elements obviously would be different. So yeah, that could be cool.
They have this line that the worms can't cross because it's too much moisture, but we wanted to capture the central Dune fantasy first before we started working on those other areas. Pretty much like lightly confirms like, hey, there's gonna be the snow expansion update as we move into the tundra and the like polar ice cap areas, right?
That's actually pretty big that he just revealed in an interview with Force Gaming here that, hey, yeah, we're going to have a big expansion of the ice cap areas. That's pretty big, you know, just kind of divulging a lot there.
Probably a safe bet that might happen in the future if they continue supporting this game, right? Well, just throwing that out there. Now, my next question was about endgame. I asked him if they have anything that we would consider endgame, things like group-focused PvE activities.
Yes.
Here's the answer that I got. He said it's going to depend whether it's a PvP activity or not. So the Deep Desert has the big spice blows, and it's really a PvE activity to harvest spice. So you want to have a coordinated group, you want to be flying a transport ornithopter, carrying a sandcrawler, you want scouts, you want people riding point with sand bikes to be dumping out thumpers to keep the sandworm away from you. We do actually really talk about it in terms of raids. He was talking.
This sounds so cool. Just like the books, just like the movies. Oh man, that sounds awesome. Distract the worms, get the spice going, bring in the mining rigs, you know, have your buddies hovering in the ornithopters to shoot the worms away or something. Like, that sounds so cool.
Talking about how the internal team discusses harvesting spice. He said that they say, these are the raids in our game.
Okay.
The boss is the sandworm, except instead of fighting it, you're trying to keep them away. While you're keeping them away, you're also harvesting spice out in the desert, and so that's the kind of coordinated PvE activity. The thing is, though, that this area is a PvP zone, so another guild can show up, and then you have to make those kind of decisions. Are we staying here to defend our harvesting area, or are we moving somewhere else?
That sounds hectic. It sounds crazy, and it sounds so fun. That actually sounds really cool. And I don't know. Okay, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm sure there are examples of this in other MMOs. But from where I'm sitting, from what I know of, you know, the examples that I have, like Final Fantasy XIV, a little bit of WoW. I haven't played all of WoW, you know, all of the expansions or anything. But a little bit of WoW, you know, like Terra Online. I played Terra. Yeah, that's right. From my examples that I have, I can't think of anything that is quite like this that they're talking about. This style of raiding, where you're not even really trying to defeat a boss. You're trying to keep the boss busy so that you can do the thing. It sounds interesting. And then also having the PvP thrown in on top of that, I think it could be really fun.
Activity itself, though, is designed as PvE, but the fact that you're in a zone where that threat can happen means that it can also quickly turn into PvP. So
Right.
I followed up by asking if they would have any of what I would consider more traditional group-focused PvE content. Like, are they going to have any large-scale, elaborate enemy compounds, for example, with things like a traditional, hey, here's a very large, heavily armored boss of sorts at the end. You go
Yeah, that's a fair question. Absolutely. I was wondering that myself.
in, you clear it for loot, stuff like that. His response was, there will be some of that stuff post-launch. It's not part of the main plan for launch, just because we wanted to focus on getting the Deep Desert right, having the recurring cycles and all of that. There is a plan, however, to ship some of that stuff post-launch. That is definitely down the alley, like you raid a base to turn off anti-aircraft missiles to gain access to certain resources that you need. That's something in the plan.
So I do worry, hearing some of that their focus is not as much on the gameplay as it could be, or at least not as much on having a lot to do for the players as it could be. So I love that they're going for great aesthetics, right? I love that. I love that they're trying to make it look like the Dune universe. They're trying to hit on some really important things with the Dune universe, right? I love that. And, you know, some of the gameplay elements that they've mentioned, they sound pretty fun, right? The sandworms and mining the spice being the raids, you know, and then having to fend off enemy teams as well. I love that. That sounds great. But, man, he's talking about having more traditional PvE kind of content, and they're saying that's not even going to be out at launch. I do worry that there's not going to be enough for people to do. I think it's a substantial worry based on that.
for the future that's concretely on the table. So if it wasn't already clear beyond the survival crafting elements of the game, yes, like there will be PvE activities in things like the enemy camps and going into the Echo Labs. But the main driving factor in this game, especially come the end game and the deep desert, it's that PvP conflict. So I did have a few questions about PvP itself. I asked about that PvE scenario that he mentioned, okay? So your guild is out in the deep desert, you're harvesting spice together, and then all of a sudden it turns into PvP when another guild shows up. So then my follow-up question was, so another guild shows up, what is that process like? And can 6 other guilds show up? His answer was yes.
Ooh, good question. Yeah, I hadn't even considered that. I thought it would be like a one-on-one thing, or at least that's all I had in my mind.
Yes, the desert is fully open PvP. However many players decide to go to a single location, that is the number of players that you're gonna see. However,
so is this going to be one of those situations where the first person to build the biggest guild is going to dominate forever? Because that's kind of what it sounds like. You could just have the biggest guild just dominating the map forever because they just have the numbers and they're always going to win those PvP instance fights or whatever.
He did add, you might hit a technical cap. It depends on our server optimization for launch, just to be clear. So I don't know how many players are going to be per server. Like we gave some numbers, like we'll have a minimum of 40 people in the Haga Basin. We should have more than that in the deep desert per server instance. And the server instances are chained together, sort of like server meshing that you've seen a lot of games talking about lately. The deep desert though is one seamless set of servers chained together, which means it supports a lot more players. If 6 guilds show up and they're 100 players each, I'm not sure we can support 600 people in 1 square kilometer. That might not work. So with him saying that, I responded by asking, how would...
Okay, interesting. So more concerns coming to mind, or at least confirmed concerns, I guess. Because remember I said I really am not a fan of the MMO light experiences, and then he's talking about, 40 players max. Like, seriously, what happened to the days of like 500 players, 1,000 players on a server? Like, what is this? 40 players? Come on. Why does everything have to be instanced now? Why does it have to be like these Destiny experiences? It's just not the same, I prefer those classical MMO experiences, not this MMO light thing. Now, I'm still excited because it's the Dune universe. I want to experience it. I want to try it. But yeah, it's just a little disappointing,
This be surfaced to players, right? So if like 6 guilds all showed up at a single area to fight over this spice blow, do some portion of them get instanced out of that area? Are they going to be phased and not see each other? But his answer was interesting. He said no. What'll likely happen is as we grow closer to a soft cap, there will be some natural things that occur. For example, sandstorms will come in to drive players away from the area. However, if people insist we're just going to throw up a hard barrier, we have this lore police force in place that can drop hard barriers around specific areas. So basically,
okay, that's interesting. At least they found a way to kind of make it make sense in the world, in the game, to kind of lock players out when they reach that cap. I like that. I like that they made it kind of appropriate for the world.
Basically, this is pretty much what's going to happen whenever Asmongold decides to go anywhere in the deep desert. They're probably going to be having these police forces dropping these barriers to cordon people off, right? What's interesting...
True, he's going to be trying to bring his 1,000 roaches with him, and they're going to get stopped at like 40 or whatever it is. Yeah, that's going to be interesting.
The thing here, though, is learning that they actually do intend for the deep desert to be fully open, uninstanced, and no phasing. They're using this server meshing technology to make it so that if you and 100 other people all decide to go to a single area, this say 1 spice blow or 1 enemy base that's out in the desert, you should all see each other at that area at the same time.
I mean, that at least is cool. I wonder why they couldn't include this server meshing technology through the whole game. I mean, I'm sure there's some design element to it that I don't know. I'm not an engineer, a server engineer, but it just makes me wonder, like, why couldn't they have done this server meshing technology for the basin, for every area, so that you could see a ton of players like they're talking about in the deep desert? It's weird. Why couldn't they do it everywhere?
Up until they hit this server issues with player caps within that square kilometer region, and at that point they're going to start throwing in sandstorms to force people out, or if that doesn't work, dropping those police barriers if things get even crazier. But There is no phasing. There are no 100 different instances of one particular area. If you and 100 or 200 people all want to go to one spot and stand on 1 grain of sand, you'll be able to do it up until the server threshold issues, and then they're going to do things to mitigate that. But there's no phasing. There's not going to be, I'm standing on this grain of sand and my friend is standing on that grain of sand, but we don't see each other because we're in different phases. That is not something they're going to do.
That at least is cool. I will say that. That at least is cool. You'll be able to see your friends. You'll be able to see other people up to the cap. That's pretty cool.
Which is really, really interesting. I'm really interested to see how this plays out and if it isn't just a total laggy mess, right? He added as well, though, that the deep desert is quite massive. He said it's like 9 times the size of Haga Basin, which, mind you, he said Haga Basin was larger than their other game, Conan Exiles, and that's a pretty big game.
Whoa. 9 times the size. So if it's 9 times the size of Conan Exile's map, that should be about 470 kilometers squared? That's insane.
It is huge. That's the other side of it. It's what you see in the movies. It's a big expanse of sand and only a few rock islands. There's definitely meeting points on those islands, but it is 15 minutes to fly across. It takes quite a while to get from one end to another. But
I mean, maybe that's good though. You know, that sounds encouraging actually, because, you know, if you're trying to make it a big experience just like in the movies or in the books, right? The desert should be huge.
Back to the PvE and PvP discussion, he continued, the point is that if you're a smaller guild and you don't want to fight people for spice, you can still be out there doing that PvE harvesting and sort of just run away. The idea is...
Okay, that kind of counters my argument then, I guess. You know, if you're just fast about it, if you're sneaky about it, if you know the spawn points, I guess, or I don't know, you know, if you can find an advantage that way, if you can be quicker about it, then you can still partake in that PvE.
That the space works to the advantage of the players, and it also means that people who don't really like PvP, which he said is a lot of people, and he's well aware of that, it means that if you feel like it, you can dip your toe into this activity and be on your ornithopter and fly away. If you see 6 guilds coming towards you, you'll be able to get away. You'll have those sight lines. He then added that they really...
That's good. That's good. At least there is an avenue for the people who like PvE more than PvP. I'm glad to hear that.
Want to avoid the typical issue that open world PvP survival games have. He said, in survival games, what I see with PvP, just take Conan Exiles for example, is it's never 10 versus 10. It's always like 8 versus 1, or like 30 people come over a hill and there's 5 guys harvesting alone, and then those 30 people just charge. And they have a great time, but the 5 people don't. We're trying to make it so that the 5 people feel like it's worth their time to get out of there if they want to. They can just pick up and get away if necessary. But yes, when it comes to the deep desert, it is just full-on PvP 100% of the time. It's going to turn into Zergfest, but they're going to have systems in place to try to mitigate too many people being too overwhelming on the servers in one particular location.
That's good to hear, because yeah, that was my concern earlier, right? Just one massive guild gets going and, you know, nobody else can really partake in the spice mining, in the in-game content, you know? Yeah, that would be really concerning if that was the case. So it's good to hear that they're trying to mitigate that,
using that server meshing technology that they have. But yeah, it is the case that, like, if you're trying to harvest spice and 6, 7, 8 other guilds show up to push you out of there, they'll be able to push you out of there. You could choose to say, but it's probably not going to go too well for you. And there are things like vehicle destruction. There isn't full corpse looting, but there is things like resource loss. So all of this stuff you're going to have to keep in consideration. Now, a lot of that was really fun.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's cool that the vehicles are destructible and everything. I like hearing about stuff like that. All those little details, they kind of add to it. That's cool.
Focused on the PvP in the deep desert, but there is also limited PvP that will be happening in the Haga Basin as well. Okay. He said it's primarily happening around the crash ships that were mentioned earlier. So the way this will work is you will see ships falling from the sky. It'll happen in real time, and then players will run to those areas because there are valuable resources to collect. However, within that proximity around the ship in that immediate area, it is full-on PvP, so you'll have to keep your head on the swivel if you're going in and trying to grab resources and then run away. Also,
okay, and that all sounds reasonable. At least there is an area at the beginning where you can kind of get going without it being full-on PvP. I like hearing that.
He mentioned that some select faction bases, those like enemy camps, those can be PvP flagged as well. Not all of them, but there will be a select few. Now, another interesting mechanic in this game that I was curious about are those massive storms that reset the play space, specifically the deep desert. So I asked about that. So the deep desert, he said, has the Coriolis storm that happens every week. It wipes everything, absolutely everything, and changes the landscape. So what was there last week will be different this week. The sand comes in, it wipes everything, and then there's all of a sudden a new ecology lab that you hadn't seen before, or a new
That actually sounds cool. I like that. I like that a lot. I like the reset aspect. I like being able to see new things on the map. And it makes sense too. You have a sandstorm come in, it's going to completely change up the dunes. It would. So this is super cool.
Shipwreck. There's also new islands, and they're in different places. So you need to go in, you need to reestablish your logistics and resurvey the area to figure out where things are.
That's
in the
awesome.
deep desert, you'll get things like items that are only there for that week, and you don't know when they're going to show up next. One specific Eco Lab might only be there once every 2 months, and for that week, you can go there to get this schematic to craft a unique rifle, and you're the only person that can craft it because you're the only person who found that schematic at.
Hey, this is pretty crafty. Yeah, I see what they're doing here. Yeah, so you're changing things up on them, and it's randomized, so you don't know when it's going to occur, and so that keeps people playing. They're looking for these ecology labs. They're looking for this reset to happen and to find the new location of these special resources. Very crafty to keep people interested in your game. I like it.
That Eco Lab, and then once it goes away the next week, all of a sudden you could have the super rare resource that no one could get a new one of, and you could sell it on the auction house. You could craft the item and sell it. You'll have a lot of options, or you can just craft it and make it for yourself and your mates. And his mentioning of these unique schematics also had me curious about how gearing works in the game and what the focus is going to be. So I asked him if the main gear hunt is focused on the schematics that you then craft, or am I going to be also finding rifles in the desert? He said, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, so definitely about schematics. Okay.
It's definitely more about schematics. In WoW, you roll for the loot itself, right? Well, in our game, you get the schematic and then you have to craft it, but that also adds value to you in a few ways because you can then sell it in the auction house. We don't have any sort of bind on pickup. And because this is a...
Okay, interesting. Yeah, no bind on pickup. It's not bound to the person who picks it up, so you can just sell the schematic. You can make tons of money off of it if it's like a super rare item or something. That's cool.
Survival crafting game, I asked if they're going to have some of what I consider the more important quality of life features in this genre. Specifically, will they have crafting from storage? Will they have auto sort? Will they have deposit similar items?
Thank you. Yes, these are good questions to ask. Yes, quality of life features for the win, please.
When moving from your inventory to chest. And he said yes to all three of those. Thank you so much. Now, the final thing I asked him was to...
We love to hear it. Oh, man, it's so annoying in New World, or at least it was, right? I think they changed it a lot. It's still not great, but yeah, it used to be locked to a location, and then you had to switch items between township that you were going to. So annoying. So this is good to hear.
To basically walk us through what are considered their dungeons, what they have called their dungeons, which are these eco labs. They're going to be scattered all around the environment. They're going to have like different settings and themings and locations. And he made it clear to me when talking about this that it isn't like a traditional MMO dungeon, like these 5 players instance things with really challenging boss fights with tons of different phases at the end, but rather it's much more akin to like a Bethesda dungeon. Think sort of along the lines of Fallout or Skyrim or even Starfield. These will be instance locations with set themings and backstories that you discover as you explore them. So you'll be going...
Maybe that's okay. Maybe this is good. Because I love those experiences in like Fallout. You know, you find a new location. It's really interesting. Oh, what is this? This looks totally different. I want to go check it out. You go inside. There's enemies throughout. You're looting. You maybe you find kind of like a harder enemy within the building, and that's kind of like the boss of the building, if you will. But yeah, all in all, it's more of a natural flow, right? It doesn't feel so scripted, like, oh, these are the 2 enemies that are always stationed here, and this is the boss room, and this is the boss, you know? It feels more natural, like, oh, you just kind of happened upon this building that was filled with some foes, and you cleared them out, and you got some cool stuff. Yeah, this could be a good thing.
Going through these corridors, you'll come across small groups of enemies, but more so, there will be flavor text and lore bits like leftover audio logs or something that you'll interact with and will tell you a bit of story about the area. And then as you progress, you find more audio logs, you find more clues about what happened in this region, why it's abandoned, what was going on here. And eventually you might have a boss at the end, but it's going to be, instead of like a normal enemy that might take like 5 seconds to take out, it might take like 15 seconds to take out the more souped up up version at the end. But yeah, the way he was describing it about exploring and uncovering lore about that particular area and its history and its previous inhabitants or what they were doing there, you discover more and more as you progress. It really, as he was sharing it with me, it reminded me so much of like going through a cavern in Skyrim or a location in a Fallout game or in Starfield. It was
exactly that's what I was just saying, right? It kind of sounds like that natural flow of just exploration rather than a very scripted and like designed experience. You know what I mean? Like, of course it's all designed, but you're going into a dungeon and you know it's a dungeon and you know there's like a sequence, like it's this, and then we fight final boss, you know? And this is very different where it's like, okay, it's exploration. I just kind of, you know, make my way through at my own pace and go where I want to go and figure it out, fight the enemies, find the cool stuff, and then leave. You know, it's much more natural, I think.
Sounded very, very reminiscent of it. In fact, he said himself as they're developing it, something like Fallout's vaults is sort of what they had in their mind.
Cool.
And it sounded actually pretty neat. Now, I personally, I would love more traditional like group-focused dungeons with hard bosses and things like that.
It would be nice. It would be nice if they could sprinkle in both. Like, I don't see why you couldn't do both and kind of appeal to both kind of perspectives there. Yeah, that's a good point.
That for the loot hunt, but I think these echo labs that they have in the game also sound interesting for what they are. And again, I really think ultimately it's important to keep in mind, it's pretty clear this is first and foremost a survival crafting building game and exploration with a big focus on PvP at the end and some PvE, but the PvE group stuff, the things like raids or the group instance dungeons, that's not really a main focus, at least not as of yet. Maybe that changes a bit in the future. But that just about does it for my interview with Joel. All in all, I thought it was a productive chat. I learned a lot of new things about the game, and I have now a much better picture of what it's going to be like to play. Unfortunately, he didn't give me any insider tips as to when we can playtest the game, so I'm just going to continue hoping it's sometime soon. I do know that they are.
I was kind of wondering about that. Is the playtest coming soon? Can we expect a date? Maybe this year, hopefully? We'll see.
Are doing testing right now currently, but it's like strictly NDA, really small scale. I think you can register for a chance to be invited. But in terms of like larger stuff like open beta weekends, I have no idea. I would love to get my hands on the game like this fall or winter or something, but we will see. I'll keep you guys posted. But yeah, I mean, I think Dune Awakening is sounding pretty good. I hope it turns out well. As a fan of survival crafting games, I like PvP, I like open world stuff. Really interested to see how this turns out. Sounds good. Looking forward to seeing a lot more raw actual gameplay, which I do believe they intend on showing later this month actually at Gamescom, so stay tuned for that. But that is it for today. Thank you as always for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.
Nice. That was a good video. Thank you, Force Gaming. Yes, and I'm glad you got to have that opportunity to interview. That's pretty cool. So, okay, I really hope that they do show some gameplay very soon, because these kind of pre-rendered bits, you know, obviously it's kind of hard to tell how it's actually going to feel or what it's actually going to look like just looking at those pre-rendered bits. Maybe there's some stuff out there already that I don't know about. There probably is. I'm really only aware of just very little of this game. So this interview video of Force Gaming's was a big kind of learning experience for me. Okay, so the dungeons, like the crevices that he was talking about and the eco labs and everything, that sounds really cool. I'm excited about that. I'm not a big fan of PvP MMOs, really am not. So it's good to hear that they do have PvE elements and kind of ways to just do PvE if you want. Like, you kind of just have to play the rat. So if there's big groups coming for your spice mining rig and the worm area, then you kind of just have to get out of there, just jump in your ornithopter and run, which is fine. I think that's fine. It's just going to be a very different experience, I think. It's going to be very interesting. I really enjoyed learning about everything that's going on in this MMO. This is a good video, and thanks for watching, guys.